So at school, and rejuvenated by his skiing holiday in Italy, Eddie the horse started to put on the pressure. In my absence, he had announced a restructuring plan in which my whole team were having to basically reapply for their jobs. 7 people, 7 teachers. 1 or possibly 2 might not be offered a new contract, he said. I was asked by him to do their performance reviews and interview for the new positions. He knew them because he had been their team leader in the previous year. I wasn't enthusiastic because I didn't know them. When I told him this, he didn't like my lack of enthusiasm. I counted the days I'd been at school, 13 since my arrival in Abu Dhabi. Half of them have been spent in MZ. How could I do a performance review over the past 6 months, let alone interview my team for a new restructured job after such a short space of time? It seemed like the restructuring idea was just designed to buy time. It was a cosmetic exercise. All it did, of course, was create massive uncertainty and anxiety. A typical mad scheme coming out of HR. HR was full of yuppies half my age who had never lived overseas. It was absurd. If Eddie and his buddies didn't want to renew the contracts of a couple of my team, why not simply tell them their contract was not going to be renewed? Making everyone reapply for new jobs with me carrying the can seemed like a neat piece of subterfuge to get rid of the 2 staff he actively disliked, the American and another guy. But I knew who would cop responsibility for it all if I did the interviews. I could feel the panic starting to rise. I liked my team. I thought they were doing a good job. Ridwit was a pain, but if he was kicked into line now and again, he was salvageable. The American was a pain, yes, but he was strong in some areas and potentially a very useful team member. The others were excellent. Why were they being asked to reapply for their jobs? I didn't see the problem. The next day was another training day in Abu Dhabi. This time it was for principals only. I was traveling from MZ with one of the other principals, and on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi, my phone rang. Hello, Don. This is Yuri here from MZ. Penta have arrived. Now, Penta were the monitoring agency employed by the government to assess our progress in the schools. Yikes! They want to know where the files are. The files were the ring binders that the American had unceremoniously thrown on my desk on day 2. Oh, well, they're on the floor beside my desk, I said. No problem, Don, said Yuri. Everything is under control. I was proud of Yuri. I was proud of the team. They seemed to have my back already. But Eddie had a different reaction. I arrived in Abu Dhabi and detected a certain chill in the atmosphere around my boss. I could see him walking around the hallways with his phone stuck to his ear, speaking in an unnecessarily loud voice in a self-important way designed to impress anyone within earshot. He was wearing his usual pea soup coloured suit. I didn't like it. Eddie the horse was a star performer in the principal's training day program. Even though he was busy, he came over to me. Penta have arrived. I think we'd better meet over lunch. I gulped. What was he worried about? He seemed tense. According to Yuri, things were okay in MZ with Penta. We met at lunch and he went through a series of documents which he felt Penta would want to see and interrogate in the next 24 hours. Mostly it was jargon, stating and then restating the bleeding obvious. There were several documents and plans, and I had, of course, only a very rudimentary grasp of them after 13 days of trying to find accommodation. One of them had silly things like, by the end of June 2009, that's 12 months since the beginning of the project, 50% of all classes will be taught through English by Palestinians, Egyptians, and Syrians. Yeah, right. Maybe by the end of 2050. The horse was going through these documents and wanting to know from me where we were in relation to the key performance indicators, KPIs. I thought to myself, well, you should know. You were the principal last year before I came. But I didn't say that. He wanted to know what I had done since the last visit of Penta in November. The answer was very little. Because of the exams and the short time, I had been on site 13 days. Well, what have you been doing for the past 2 months, he said. Well, that was it. I could feel the panic rising. Well, I said, first of all, I've been organizing a place to live for at least half of my time since my arrival. Same for all of us, he interrupted. No, it wasn't. He was put up in the Liwa Hotel for 6 months when he arrived, and so were everybody else. Second, I've only been on site for 13 working days. How can you expect me to be familiar with these things in such a short time? My task has been to get to know Jihad, my local principal, my team of CFBD teachers, and my local teachers. I have not had nearly enough time to familiarize myself with all of this paperwork. The American had told me, when he wasn't spitting at me, that he and the horse had spent about 6 months doing nothing else except getting to know staff when they both had first arrived in MZ 18 months ago. The bare facts were, my boss had been the principal of my school before being promoted to cluster director. I was his successor. He was worried about the school and Penta. I was worried about him. I wasn't eating much of my lunch by this time. He was eating like a horse. I could feel the panic rise. I made my decision. Well, I think I should go back to MZ and prepare some stuff for Penta tomorrow, I lied. Yes, I think that's a good idea. It also meant I would miss his afternoon presentation in Abu Dhabi, which suited me just fine. I got a taxi and went back to MZ quick sharp. My mind was racing the whole time. When I got back, I visited the American in his pigeon loft across the road. All the houses in MZ were completely covered in pigeons. For some reason, they loved to land and completely cover the houses in, their excrement. And they slept there and they stayed there during the day. It was like a scene from an Alfred Hitchcock movie, but it was, the case. So his house was worse than most people, so we called it the pigeon loft. I'd never seen it before. He was opening up a bit to me because the Penta visit had gone well. We went through some stuff. I told him Eddie was on my case about Penta I feel like going to the airport, I joked. I'll take you, he joked, but only half seriously. I left him and crossed back to my own pigeon loft and started to pack. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I had time to get a taxi to Abu Dhabi and fly to Australia that evening. I called the CEO in Abu Dhabi. Look, it seems my boss is not satisfied with the way I'm doing things. I think he just wants you to produce a weekly plan of what you're doing. Oh dear, the M word had finally reared its ugly head. Micromanagement. I continued packing. I'm trying to get accommodation, which I had been promised was ready for my arrival, I said. That's my weekly plan. Calm down, I said to myself. I had 2 Amstel beers to pluck up some Dutch courage, but the panic was still there. I got on my orange bicycle and headed for the taxi rank in town. You go Abu Dhabi airport now. How much? 400 dirham. Okay. We drove to my house. I finished the packing. I'd started earlier in the afternoon. I never saw my orange bicycle again. It was left at the taxi stand. My legs were hurting again with the phlebitis. But it wasn't phlebitis. It was a deep vein thrombosis. But I didn't care. I was going home to Adelaide. I was relieved, I think.